Hello everyone and welcome back to the coverage of the Magnus Invitational. We are continuing the match Fabiano Caruana versus Maxime Vachier Lagrave, and this is game 3. Game 1, as you know, was won by Fabi. Game 2 was a draw, and now we are at game 3. So in game 1, on Fabi's d4, Maxime replied with that Slav defense that we've enjoyed, but here Maxime decides that it's time to go back to playing some normal openings with black, or maybe not. So on Fabi's d4, Maxime goes for f5. He goes for the Dutch defense. And okay, it does seem that Maxime came to the tournament to have some fun. We have g3 and now knight to f6. We have bishop to g2 and the g6 now. Knight to f3, we have bishop to g7 and Fabi just castles. Maxime also castles and c4, and we have the setup of the Leningrad Dutch defense. We have d6 by Maxime and knight to c3 now. We have c6 and now comes d5. So Fabi grabs more space in the center. We have e5 by Maxime, trying to get a closed center, but we have d captures on e6 en passant. So we have bishop captures on e6 and now b3, preparing to fianchetto the dark square bishop to oppose black's dark square bishop. We have knight to a6 by Maxime and bishop to b2. Queen e7, developing the queen, connecting rooks, preparing to bring the rook into the game, and e3 now. We have knight to c5, will be an excellent square for the knight. Also, you can switch to e4 later on, and queen e2. Fabi also develops the queen, connects the rooks, and now there is one game in the database where a5 was played, but here rook 8 to d8 is a new move by Maxime, so as of move 13, we have a completely new game. So d5 probably an idea, so rook 8 to d1, controlling the d5 square, and now h6, not allowing any knight g5 action, and queen back to c2 now, preparing to shift the knight over to e2 from where it can go to f4 and d4. Bishop to f7 opens up the queen, and now comes knight to e2 as planned. We have knight c to e4 now, and knight to d2 now, trying to get rid of the knight from e4, but Maxime goes back, knight to c5. We have knight back to f3 by Fabi, and rook f to e8 with more control of the e4 square. We have knight e to d4, and now comes knight c back to e4. So a lot of horsing around here. We have knight back to d2, again offering some trades, and now finally, as Fabi allowed it, Maxime goes for d5. So we have some trades here, c captures, and now, sorry, not c captures, but first the bishop captures on d5, and now knight to back to f3. So keeping this close, the c pawn nicely guards the bishop here, and it is an excellent outpost for the knight. So knight to g4. Just getting that knight deeper into the position, and here Maxime has two excellently placed knights, and if Fabi wants to kick them away, he will have to further weaken the king side with h3. We have rook d to e1 by Fabi, and now c5, pushing back the knight. Knight to b5 with the idea of shifting it back to c3 if you don't defend a7, that is. So bishop captures on b2, queen captures, and a6 now, pushing back the knight. Knight to c3, and now just with a double attack on the knight, queen to g7. Also, the knight cannot move as the queen here would hang. Well, okay, you can move it to a4 and d1. But Fabi goes rook to c1 instead. Defends the c3 knight, and bishop back to c6. So just opens up the d file for the rook. So now if this knight moves, then ideas like rook to d2 come to mind. So h3, and here's the moment where Maxime did take some time to figure out what to do here, as there are really a lot of moves that come to mind here. Most obvious one, of course, bringing back the knight, but you have to consider knight captures on g3, you have to consider knight captures on e3, you have to consider knight captures on f2. And indeed, all of the captures are possible and preferred to retreating the knight, but it also requires time to calculate. So Maxime went back with knight to f6, but knight captures on f2 would have been very interesting, because you do win the rook for 2 knights, and after queen captures you have this very nice rook lift with rook to d3 with a double attack on the knight, and after the knight moves, now queen to d7, then the other rook comes to d8, and you will have immense pressure along the d file. Yes, white has 2 knights for the rook, but your position is very nice. You are also up a pawn, and the g3 pawn seems to be weak. So black would definitely have compensation here, but impossible to decide in such short time formats. So knight g to f6, Maxime goes back, and now Fabi trades in the center. Knight captures, we have knight captures, and queen to c2 now. We have b5 now, preparing rook to c8 and c4, which will give Maxime a passed pawn here. So rook f to d1 and now king to h7, just improving the position of the king. We have knight to d2, now trying to trade everything off. Also, the bishops might come off the board. So first rook to c8, defending the bishop, and now Fabi trades. Knight captures on e4, we have bishop captures, and rook captures. And here rook to d6 by Fabi. A very nice rook lift going after the a6 pawn. And Maxime, instead of trying to defend the a6 pawn, which would be very passive, decides to go for the active c4, which will give him a passed pawn. So here, just rook c to d1, doubling up on the d file, and you still can't capture because the rook would hang on c8, and black might have to worry about some rook d7 ideas if this rook ever moves. So first rook back to e7, and you also have to calculate ideas like queen captures rook followed by rook here if white favors the trade. So just rook back to e7 by Maxime, but now rook captures on a6. Fabi grabs a pawn, and rook to d7 now, going for the trade. We have rook captures, queen captures, and now a double trade on c4. Captures, and now Fabi has a passed pawn on the a file, and Maxime has a passed c pawn. But Fabi is still up a pawn. So rook to a3, not allowing this pawn to move further. We have rook to c7, and now rook to c3. We have queen to d5 defending, and now Fabi starts pushing his own passed pawn. a4. We have h5 by Maxime, and now a5. Fabi further starts pushing the pawn. And here Maxime decides to just grab it, not to defend it with queen b5 or rook to c6. He decides to trade, and he says that he will hold this 3 against 4 in a queen and pawn endgame. So here we have queen captures on a5, we have a trade on c4, captures, and now queen to a1 with check. We have king to h2 and queen back to a7. So it's 3 against 4, queen and pawn endgame with pawns on the same side of the board. And usually, if you let engines play this out, they will well, very often draw the game. But for a human, it's surprisingly difficult to for the defending side to defend and for the attacking side to convert the extra pawn. So queen and pawn, I think, are the most difficult of endgames. So queen to f4. Fabi just tries to improve the position of the queen. We have queen to d7 and now queen to e5, further centralizing. Queen to b7, Maxime just has to wait, and queen to d6. Fabi just grabs more space with the queen. Queen to b2, going after the f2 pawn, and queen e7 check now. King h6 and king g2, just defending the f2 pawn. Queen b3, and here Fabi goes for g4, temporarily giving up a pawn, but he will win it back. And he wants to trade some pawns, and it's a principle in chess. For example, here you have 4 against 3, and now Fabi just trades everything. Captures, and now with check he will pick it up. King g7, and now just queen captures on g4. And now 2 against 1 is a much bigger advantage than 4 against 3. So queen d5 check and king g3. We have queen to c6 and now queen to d4 with check. And now Fabi will slowly but surely start pushing his own passed pawn. King h7 and e4 now. We have queen to b7 and now e5. We have queen to b3 check. Now comes f3, just defending, and queen to b1, now trying to do some damage from behind. We have king to f4 and now queen to f5 with check. King e3, queen to g5 check, and now king to d3. So what Fabi needs to do is try and escape all the checks and hopefully promote one of the pawns. So queen f5 check, we have queen to e4 blocking, and now queen e6, just blocking this pawn, and now king back to e3. We have king to g7 and now king to f4 as the f5 square is nicely defended now. Queen to f7 check and king back to g3. We have queen to b3, not allowing f4, and queen to d4 now, preparing to push the pawn with check. So queen to e6 blocking and queen to d6 now by white, offering a queen trade. So Maxime of course declines, you cannot trade queens here. Queen to e7 with check, now comes king to g8 and queen to d8 with check. That's not a d8. Queen to d8 with check. King to g7 and now queen to c7 with check. King g8 and now queen to c4 with check again. King g7 and queen to f4 now, trying to trade off the queens this way. Queen back to e6 and now queen to d4, giving black the move. So king f7 and now finally f4. There is a pawn move, so the 50 move rule goes, starts over. We have queen to b3 with check, and now king h4. Queen b7, we have queen to d1 now, and king to g7. We have queen to a1, now again preparing to push with check, and queen to e7 check. King to g3, and again blocking with queen to e6. But now queen to a7 with check. King g8, and queen to b8 with check. King f7, and here queen to c7 with check. King g8, and finally queen to d6. Again, the same position we already had, only now the pawn is on f4 instead of on f3. So queen f5, and now finally e6. This is how Fabi pushes the pawn. Queen, we have queen to e4, and now king back to f2. We have king to g7, and now queen e7 with check. King h6, and now queen to d6, defending the pawn and trying to push the pawn to e7. So we have king back to g7, and now not going for e7 right away, because after king to f7 it would be very hard to do this, since both the queen and the king guard the e8 square. So first queen to c7 check by Fabi, king h6, and now e7. And now that the king is here, it is easier now, since the king cannot reach f7 in time. Queen d4 check, we have king to e2, and now queen e4 check. So now Fabi has to figure out how to get rid of all the checks. King d2, we have queen d4 check, and now king c2. So you don't have queen c4 check, but you have queen to a4. But now Fabi starts bringing the king up the board. King c3, queen a3 check, king d4, we have queen to b4 check, king goes to d5, queen b5 check, and now finally king to d6. We have queen to d3 with check, king to c6. We have queen to e4 with check, king d7, queen to d5 with check, and now finally queen to d6. Still keeping an eye on both pawns, defending check, queen b7 check, and now finally king to e6. We have queen to c8 check, we have king to f7, and now queen to f5 with check. But here Fabi just played queen to f6, and it was in this position that Maxime Vachier Lagrave resigned the game, and game 3 also goes to Fabi, which means as he won 2 games and 1 game was a draw, that he wins the match. And Maxime is definitely, definitely out of the tournament. He will play one more round, of course, but he will not go into playoffs, as only the top 4 go into playoffs. So here you resign because after queen to d5 check, you're gonna go king to f8, and now there are no more useful checks. Anything you do, like queen to a8 with check, will be met with e8 queen, and now it's just game over. So yeah, 103 moves is what it took Fabi to take down Maxime in this queen and pawn endgame. But like I said, queen and pawn endgames are just difficult, weird, exhausting, and well, especially when you have little time to calculate every queen move, they are pretty much impossible. So yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Abdul Mohsin Al-Raji, Carlsen Kurtze, Steven Atkinson, Chris Antley, and Martin Frischer for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Magnus Invitational until it finishes. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.